Well, Portland was the scene of Britain's biggest spy case in 1961 when the Russians obtained our most sensitive naval secrets. It was such a tremendous coup that even now, 32 years later, British intelligence still doesn't know how much was taken. 5 spies were convicted, but in Moscow it's now been revealed that other agents were missed by MI5. Portland will close in less than 3 years, the victim of defence cuts brought about by the collapse of the Soviet bloc. But in the 1950s, it was the centre of NATO's anti-submarine effort to counter the growing menace of the Soviet fleet.
I named this ship Dreadnought.
In Britain's biggest spy case, the Russians managed to obtain all the details of the sonar technology for Britain's first nuclear submarine, Dreadnought. 5 spies were arrested and imprisoned. 2 local people, Ethel G., a filing clerk, and Harry Houghton, a former Navy Master-at-Arms, had turned traitors for money. Another couple, Peter and Helen Kroger, posed as antiquarian booksellers, but they were undercover KGB agents sending Portland's secrets back to Moscow. They worked with the KGB officer Conan Melody, who posed as a Canadian businessman and became the first and only Russian to be caught spying in the West. Peter Kroger, the last surviving member of the ring, is now dying in a Moscow hospital. It was feared he would take with him the untold story of Portland. But now the spymaster in Moscow, a KGB colonel, has revealed that other agents were involved and MI5 missed them.
Что MI5 упустила других людей, это так.
MI5 did miss some people, but if it worked long on the case, it would have missed Lonsdale as well. It is hard to tell what have happened if MI5 took longer to work. Probably they would have more information or more details, but there were some people who escaped even in this case, so probably much more people would have escaped.
For Chapman Pincher, former Daily Express defence correspondent, it's confirmation of a long-held belief in British intelligence.
There were others is beyond question as far as MI5 is concerned. In addition, I got some very interesting information from a character called George Wigg, later Lord Wigg, who became the overseer for security to Harold Wilson. And he told me, he said, he knew beyond question, of course his information must have come from MI5, so it's the same source, that a number of people had escaped because the police blew the whole arrest too early.
Oleg Gordievsky, who defected to Britain in 1985, served in the special KGB department which supervised the Portland operation. He believes the others may never be found.
Because they never were arrested, and because they may be still alive, for the KGB it is very important to keep their identities and the whole knowledge about them absolutely secret.
With the base closing, those other spies now have to live with the folly of their actions. But in 1961, the treachery of Portland was so damaging, it gave the Russians our most sensitive naval secrets at the height of the Cold War.
And you can see more of that report in Southern Eye on BBC Two tonight at 7:30. Following that, I shall be talking to the former KGB officer Oleg Gordievsky, who became the most valuable informant to British intelligence during the Cold War years, and to his wife about their lives in Russia and here in the south of England. At Southern Eye Sound on your BBC local radio station.
Now hit by defence cuts, it will shut in April 1996. By the end of the 1950s, a top-level NATO decision had been taken to concentrate its underwater research at the base, and so it became a vital resource to counter the growing menace of the Soviet submarine fleet. The work, which was to give the West such an advantage, was carried out in this anonymous building in the middle of the base, Building 231. The judge in the 1961 spy trial said it was full of intrigue and had all the characteristics of a thriller. The charge faced by 5 agents failed to convey exactly how sinister the storyline was, that between April the 14th, 1960 and January the 7th, 1961, they conspired together with other persons unknown to commit breaches of Section 1 of the Official Secrets Act. The Kremlin had engineered the plot as far back as 1953. The KGB at the Lubyanka had worked out how it could unfold in the coming years. Now in 1993, the details have finally been revealed in Moscow. For nearly 40 years, Russian intelligence kept the Portland operation hidden from its own people.
Here he is, at last, in the flesh. The man who braved mighty...
Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, was an heroic symbol for the Soviet Union. He'd given the communists a breathtaking lead in the space race with the United States.
Let the word go forth from this time and place.
But in the White House, a new president, John F. Kennedy, was determined the USA should counter the growing international threat of the USSR. His fears were confirmed when the East Germans suddenly erected a wall dividing Berlin. The Iron Curtain had completely closed across Europe. Despite the smiles and handshakes of photo diplomacy, Kennedy and the Soviet leader, Khrushchev, would soon be teetering on the brink of a nuclear conflagration over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Three decades later, it all seems very far away, but a peaceful Portland retains its place at a critical moment in history. Len Burt, a young sergeant seconded to Special Branch in nearby Weymouth, had, almost by accident, discovered the Soviets' intentions. In a small terraced house close to the naval base, he uncovered a list of 12 simple questions that confirmed Russian agents had all but won a devastating victory.
At that time, the Cold War, and as time has gone on and files have been opened, it is more than apparent that the Cuba episode and things such as that, we certainly were fighting a war, if not in the sense of firing at one another, certainly in the sense of trying to obtain the secrets of one another's countries.
The way they looked at it was that war might break out tomorrow because we're talking about a sudden war with nuclear weapons. Therefore, you also always got to work on that principle that war may break out tomorrow. And the Russians were working on the same principle, that war may break out tomorrow. So they wanted everything they could find out about immediately what was happening in what might be available for use in war among the stuff that was being developed at Portland.
The Prime Minister, Macmillan, was assured that no major weapons had been compromised, but in his diary he wrote that either Portland served no useful purpose or secrets of the highest possible importance were taken. Today in Moscow, the last surviving member of the spy ring, Peter Kroger, lies dying in a carefully guarded building on the outskirts of the city. It's a hospital for spies run by what was the KGB. It allows many to take their secrets with them to the grave. Kroger, in his 8 years' imprisonment at Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, had not spoken of his activities. Like Kim Philby before him, it was feared Kroger would eventually be buried with the full story untold. A few yards away from Philby's grave, in Moscow's Novokunsky Cemetery, Kroger's wife Helen, real name Lona Cohen, was laid to rest on the frozen ground this winter. And this is the grave of Helen Kroger, or Lona Cohen. A simply worded announcement from the Russian intelligence services on January the 12th announced her death. At the same time in London, lobby correspondents were being told by the British government that Portland too was to finish, killed by defence cuts. It seemed as if the last chapter in the Portland story was being told. But in fact, 1993 sees the whole story being rewritten. The KGB had chosen the best people available for the job. They gave MI5 its first indication of the so-called illegal network of spies. Gordon Lonsdale was the first and only Russian caught while actively spying in the West. His real name was Conan Melody, responsible for running the British traitors within Portland. Harry Houghton had been contacted by the Polish intelligence in Warsaw as far back as 1952. When he moved to Portland, he used his girlfriend, Ethel G., to steal the necessary documents. They were paid handsomely for their treachery. An elaborate cover was constructed for Peter and Helen Kroger, who, as the Cohens, had stolen atomic secrets in the USA. They worked in London as antiquarian booksellers, and using a favourite KGB method, Portland's information was reduced to microdots and shipped across the world to Moscow. It was, the Russians thought, the perfect plan. At a time when James Bond was just about to hit the cinema screens, Ian Fleming's Flights of Fantasy had been outdone by the KGB's real-life agents.
You see that some image of romanticism was always related with the intelligence activities, in our country especially. Since, well, as far as I know, our Soviet intelligence was something very correct for a Soviet man. We all were considered as soldiers of the system, and it was a very high honor for us to belong, to touch the intelligence service at all. And when we learned a single byte of information about the intelligence activity, it was something that made us feel participants of the activities.
I named this ship Dreadnought. May God bless her and all who serve in her.
The ultimate goal for the KGB was Dreadnought, Britain's first nuclear submarine. Houghton gave them her design drawings, but it was what the sub carried aboard which really interested them. Codenamed Agouti, its sonar technology was revolutionary and could give the 700-strong Soviet submarine fleet what it badly needed: complete concealment beneath the waves and ultimately shift the strategic naval balance in their favor. The existing systems of submarine detection relied on a crude underwater microphone or hydrophone. It could tell there was a noise, but not from which direction it came. More damaging was the fact the familiar ping signal sent underwater could be detected by an enemy. But the new sonar worked silently within the hull on a 240-degree electronic sweep. It was devastatingly accurate, and with 20 different functions could detect a submarine hundreds of miles away, but it was itself undetectable. It could also hide a submarine in different thermal layers of water, using sonar as an electronic camouflage. Security was lax, and Ethel G had managed to walk out with the documents hidden under her coat. Naval sources acknowledged that what the Russians obtained gave them a 1,000% advance in capability practically overnight. G had access in Building 231 to all the Admiralty's detailed performance data. At Christmas 1960, 1 month before their arrest, she'd sent Houghton a Christmas card signed, "Ours is a dangerous business." At her mother's terraced house in Portland, Len Burt discovered a list of questions which, if completed, would have given the Soviet Union every secret housed in the base, all for £150 a month paid to Houghton.
I don't think he cared what he was doing to this country. Money was what he wanted. If he had cared, if he knew what he was doing, he could have said, well, maybe it was for other reasons. He was a communist, or he had those feelings in that regard. I do believe that his motivation was purely money, and that makes his crime even worse as a traitor to this country.
G and Houghton were released in 1970 after serving 9 years of a 15-year sentence. At her trial, Lord Chief Justice Parker said she was the stronger character of the two and had acted in greed. She returned to Hambro Road, where her mother and uncle had died, friends said, from their shame while she was imprisoned.
I'm just going to live an ordinary life.
If they'll let you?
As much as possible.
If they'll let you?
As much as possible.
Do you think they will let you?
Well, that's up to them, isn't it?
It'll be a 9 days wonder, I think, and then
I don't mind, it's just up to them.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be friendly if they are.
Hello, traitor.
The people of Portland weren't friendly. Special Branch have now revealed that G had not been Houghton's only female friend, and that he'd entertained many other women who worked around the base. And the close-knit town had long memories while being short of forgiveness. The couple's contact, Conan Melody, was a Red Army officer in the Second World War, but he'd spent his childhood in America, and for the next 29 years, only 10 were spent among his own people. He entered Britain in 1955 as Gordon Lonsdale, a Canadian businessman. There were credentials of a real man who died. His cover was meticulously researched. As he entered Southampton on the liner America, he already knew Houghton had taken the KGB bait and could be reeled in. But despite his professionalism, he was himself caught by MI5.
Gordon Lonsdale was head of the tiny so-called illegal residency. He was the illegal resident in Britain, and he was the main person to run the agent network Portland.
After working as a double agent, Oleg Gordievsky defected to Britain from the KGB in 1985. Now for the first time he's talked about his part in the illegals' web of espionage.
I happened to be a member of the KGB department which was responsible for the illegal Lonsdale and running him and the Krogers. So I was in the middle of the headquarters responsible for the work of those important Russian spies. On the premises of the embassy at that time there was a large, quite important and very active legal residence, something like 70 or more KGB officers. But none of them, apart from the resident, had any idea about Lonsdale and the Krogers and their sources and so on.
From his base in London, that KGB officer had organised Houghton's recruitment, activated Lonsdale, and it's long been suspected run other agents undetected by MI5 despite the frenetic undercover operations of a Cold War Britain.
He was the officer in the legal residency who was responsible for the some aspects of the organization and the planning of the legal network. So he had to supply the center, the headquarters, with different information about the organization of the illegals. And also, from time to time, he would have been asked to carry out some contact operations with the illegals. Those contacts, which are now very rare, at that time they were a bit more frequent, but also regarded as not very desirable and very dangerous.
Because of the risk? Because
of the risk, because that a person who is known as a KGB practically to MI5 is meeting somebody who is just a foreigner, Canadian person. So it was a great risk, but sometimes it was necessary to meet the illegal.
That man is now in Moscow. The key to what MI5 officers at the time believed were as many as 10 spy rings. When Lonsdale was arrested with Houghton and G, MI5 surveillance revealed that the Spymaster was unperturbed and that no attempt was made to contact Moscow. The reason was that Lonsdale's codebook, which would have made sense of all the radio traffic with Moscow Center, had already been removed from his flat. Second Secretary VASSILY DOZHDALEV, in reality a KGB colonel, had covered his agent's tracks well. We agreed to meet him at a Russian intelligence building in a quiet street near the Kremlin. Despite speaking perfect English, the interview was to be conducted in Russian and with no surprise questions. So, would Colonel DOZHDALEV be prepared to confirm MI5's worst fears, that others had got away and that the Portland spy ring wasn't broken, merely scattered?
Was it the case that the others got away, that MI5 missed others that they could have got if they'd worked on the case longer?
Что MI5 вместе упустила других людей, это так.
MI5 did miss some people, but if it worked long on the case, it would have missed Lonsdale as well. It is hard to tell what have happened if MI5 took longer to work. Probably they would have more information or more details, but there were some people who escaped even in this case, so probably much more people would have escaped.
For Chapman Pincher, former Daily Express defense correspondent and an MI5 insider, DOZHDALEV was final confirmation.
It's hard to tell exactly how many, but that there were others is beyond question as far as MI5 is concerned. In addition, I got some very interesting information from a character called George Wigg, later Lord Wigg, who became the overseer for security to Harold Wilson when he was Prime Minister. And he held that post for 2 or 3 years and got himself deeply involved with MI5. And on one occasion we were discussing this case, and he told me, he said, he knew, beyond question, of course his information must have come from MI5, so it's the same source, that a number of people had escaped because the police blew the whole arrest too early.
Lonsdale, Houghton, G and the Krogers were arrested by George Smith, a detective superintendent in Special Branch, the original spy catcher. But after his retirement in 1970, he too acknowledged that others may have been missed in his carefully prepared trap.
It is possible. I wouldn't like to be positive and say no. I'd rather say yes, it is possible.
What MI5 wanted was that after these people had been arrested, Lonsdale, Houghton and G had been arrested, they wanted that all done in secrecy, which it could have been, and held secret from the press for 48 hours. I don't know whether the reason for this has ever been explained, but I can tell you what it was. They wanted to listen to the broadcast from Moscow immediately afterwards, because if there'd been no announcement and Moscow immediately knew they'd been arrested, well then that would be further evidence of a leak from inside MI5.
And obviously at quite a high source.
Oh yes, it would have to be a very high source, because not many people inside 5 knew about the operation, apart from those involved. Unfortunately, the police, I think for their own publicity reasons, blew the arrests immediately. It got in all the newspapers, and of course there were no broadcasts at all from Moscow.
But there were many previous broadcasts signalled by the theme Midnight in Moscow to a bungalow in Ruislip. It was established by the Krogers as a communications centre for Lonsdale. An aerial ran the length of the chimney. A high-powered transmitter was hidden under the kitchen floor.
We had a friend of ours come here, a spiritualist medium, and he exorcised the place for us because we still had that feeling here. We just couldn't get rid of it.
This has been known as the House of Secrets, or the
Yes.
Bungalow of Secrets. Do you think it's given all its secrets up?
I don't think so, because we had someone here about a year ago, and he said, if you dig at the bottom of the garden, you'll find something there. And of course, a friend of ours did dig quite down, but we couldn't find anything, so we gave it up. But we've always had a feeling that there could be something buried at the bottom of the garden.
In 1980, a second transmitter was found, wrapped in plastic at the end of the garden, yet more evidence of the scale of the Krogers' assignment. The Krogers were released in 1969 after serving 8 years of their 25-year sentence. They'd failed to provide any information when questioned. A BEA Trident was taking them to Lublin in Poland. If they'd been returned to their birthplace, the USA, they could have been executed for treason for earlier crimes. So the KGB provided a cover of Polish nationality as a backdoor route to Moscow. They travelled first class, but paid their own fares. They were taking their secrets back behind the Iron Curtain in capitalist style. As they flew out, so Aeroflot flew in Gerald Brooke, an English lecturer who'd been imprisoned in Moscow for alleged subversion. He was in fact a political pawn to secure the Krogers' release. He'd been poorly fed and mistreated, and the plan worked as it had for Lonsdale, exchanged for another Briton 5 years earlier. It was proof of how important the Portland operatives were to the KGB. Again, MI5 asked, was this all too big just to run Houghton and G? According to Colonel DOZHDALEV, Lonsdale had been alerted by others that his work at Portland was coming under MI5 scrutiny, but his contacts had been unable to indicate how close British intelligence were to unearthing Lonsdale and all his sources.
Центр, конечно, заботясь о том, чтобы
When these signals were reported to the center also failed to recognize them as danger signals, but still they told him to fold up, you know, a little bit, because though there were some more tasks to be fulfilled. Though these signals were not recognized as danger signals, when Lonsdale got an order from the center to fold up, he did not immediately did this, but he went to warn his people. And first he came to his radio operator, who told him that everything was quite calm around him and he saw no traces of any danger. But he listened to him, but others just replied that everything is in order around us, and we had settled in England with such difficulties. It had taken us so much time and so much efforts to do this that we are not going to go away.
In the Roma inquiry set up by Harold Macmillan after the spy trial, MI5 was blamed for failing to press the inquiry to a positive conclusion, unearthing the missing links.
You mean, of course, agents, those informers among the British officers or officials who also were run by Lonsdale as agents. And I wouldn't rule it out entirely. And why? Point one, only two persons, just one couple of agents. It was too little for a major organization like an important colonel, illegal Lonsdale, and two assistants with of great experience and with a lot of equipment. It was really an espionage overkill. Secondly, in his book, which Molody published afterwards, with many lies and a lot of mendacious propaganda against Britain and for himself, but he indicated that there had been some other sources. And I think it was not entirely deception. Some other sources could have been there, but because they never were arrested, and because they may be still alive, for the KGB it is very important to keep their identities and the whole knowledge about them absolutely secret.
Like Colonel Rudolf Abel, the KGB's top spy in the USA, buried nearby, Conan Molody continued to deceive and lay false trails until his death in 1970, keeping those absolute secrets. Almost in tribute as he sentenced him to 25 years, Lord Parker called him a professional spy. The KGB crest on his headstone was fully justified. It's a perverse monument to what he managed to do to Britain. In prison, he was asked if he was surprised by his arrest. He replied, "We did not think you would do it so quickly." Nor, it seems, did Colonel DOZHDALEV, who was anxious to learn the final details of the research stored in Building 231.
Я бы сказал, наоборот.
It was the worst moment in his life when Lonsdale was arrested, because he could have suspected that it was him who brought the agents to Lonsdale. In certain respects, he would find it much easier to serve a term in prison himself.
Would you do what you did again, apart from getting caught?
But she didn't know that she didn't even know that she was doing it.
Do you feel ashamed of what you've done?
Ask me, I wouldn't have done it.
Do you feel ashamed of what you've done?
I've paid the penalty, so why should I feel ashamed?
But do you feel ashamed?
I paid the penalty. No comment on that whatsoever.
2 years later, Houghton wrote a book saying that Lonsdale had just been a go-between and that the big fish had got away. KGB, now renamed the Russian intelligence services, is still an active and powerful force, but there's an open admission that the 1960s were its glory days. It effectively had run the Kremlin as its own masters in a world of intrigue and deception.
It was one of the greatest failures of Soviet intelligence in Great Britain. But at the same time, it showed that the intelligence of the Soviet Union was very powerful. It could get to the most vulnerable points of the NATO and the UK, the USA, and other countries' defense systems.
Portland will close in less than 3 years as a result of British defence cuts, a bonus of the peace dividend brought about by the collapse of the Soviet Union. If there are others like Houghton who sold its secrets, they must now live with the ultimate folly of their actions. Theirs was a dangerous business, but who did it finally profit?
We were extremely fortunate, and so were the Americans, that there was no war, because the Russians had information, particularly from a recent group of spies in the United States, that would have enabled them to write off so many warships of ourselves and of the United States in a sudden outbreak of war if they had initiated it.
Когда вы спрашивали,
The advantages that the Soviet Navy got from this Portland case, I can draw a comparison between two competing companies. When one company gets technology from, steals technology from another company and can produce a competitive product.
With the Portland base now closing, do you find that ironic after all the trouble you took to get its secrets that it's now being closed by the government, British government?
By the way, isn't it closed because Soviets left our footprints there?
So does the ending of the Cold War, symbolised by joint operations like this, mean an end to the spying game? Well, in a few minutes' time on BBC Local Radio, I shall be talking to a former Russian spy and his wife who now live in the south of England. Join me just after the 8 o'clock news on BBC Local Radio in Southern Eye Sound. But from the Southern Eye team, it's good night.